Welcome, you guys, here this evening. My name is Chuck Sears. I'm here with my son, Charles Sears. And actually, what we're looking at is my son started a company sometime back called Every Citizen Arm. And I felt that was a very good company to really get involved in, very passionate about the Second Amendment rights, about self-protection. So I really wanted to get this started off, and we're going to talk with him about that, and we're going to have him really break out why he started this company.
Every Citizen Armed ensures that every American patriot is prepped with knowledge, perspective, and firepower.
He counted on America to be passive. He counted wrong.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
When you started this company, probably, 6 years ago?
Yeah, I think 2017 was right. Yeah.
So 2017, you started this company 2017. When you really got into it, what launched you to really want to start this?
Yeah, I was serving in law enforcement, and I was also serving in the military. I was heavy around gun culture at the time, and doing a lot of training, doing a lot of training for myself, and then also doing training with other people. And what I found was that, one, there was like a strong deficiency in capabilities, right? So like a lot of people, barely knew the basic foundations of firearms, like responsible firearms ownership, firearms use. And then there was this counterculture movement that was really pushing against gun ownership. And so I'm a bit of a contrarian, and I kind of like to go against the grain when I think things don't make sense. And, as a law enforcement officer, I worked in the jails and the courts. And so I got to see the bad guys come in off the street. And when I worked the courts, I got to see a lot of, call it like miscarriage of justice. So a lot of people who were, attacked and didn't have the capability to defend themselves. And as I kind of put this whole thing together, it just kind of resonated with me like, well, we have, at a bare minimum, that every single human being has the right to defend their own life. Because if you have nothing else, you at least have your life. And if you don't have your life, then you have nothing, right? So that was kind of the idea behind Every Citizen Armed. And the reason I named it that was because what I saw, I remember working in family law, and I found there was in California, there's a policy, regulation that says, or law that says, there's something called a domestic violence restraining order. A domestic violence restraining order is not a criminal restraining order. It's a civil restraining order. And the burden of proof for this domestic violence restraining order is a preponderance of the evidence, which basically means the judge gets to decide who he believes more, and ultimately has to weigh the risk of whether or not he wants to own the outcome of his decisions. So if he says, I'm not going to grant this domestic violence restraining order, and then something does happen to the other party, then whether or not they're held liable civilly, they're held liable in their own conscience, right? And so what I found was a lot of these judges were just like handing out DVROs, whether they were justified or not wasn't up to me, but there were definitely some false positives in there.
In that, I want to back up just a second. You made a statement earlier, kind of used a phrase that I think needs to be clarified a little better. When you said you were involved in the gun culture. Now, that could be taken a couple different ways.
Sure.
So we have to be careful sometimes on how we word things. We shouldn't necessarily have to be, but this could be a big audience at times. We want to make sure they understand. When you say gun culture, what would be your definition of gun culture?
So I would say that I was involved in more heavily involved in the part of the population that lives around guns and uses them on a regular basis. I was paid to carry a gun professionally in both my military capacity and also my civilian law enforcement capacity.
Yeah, because that could be construed in a negative fashion also. So we want to make sure that we have that laid out there in that fashion, so everybody understands what gun culture is. It's not a negative, even though it gets that all the time. But it's not a negative. Gun culture, when I look at that, I would say that the folks that would consider themselves in gun culture are more about people being trained, people understanding what their responsibilities are, but taking their own responsibility at heart and understanding. Every Tom, Dick, and Carry, and Harry really probably should just carry a gun. And they're welcome to if the Second Amendment is going to allow it. But I think they really want to, in my opinion on it, and I would say you look at that as you have a responsibility to be trained and make sure you're following through with all your responsibilities of taking the time and the effort and be responsible for what you're doing. There is a lot to that. You have the ability to take a life, yes, but you have the ability to protect a life also, or multiple lives. And so that's why I just want to make sure we get a little more clarification behind that so it doesn't get lost.
Yeah, I don't think that, every human being has the right to defend their own life. And we also know that with great power comes great responsibility. And so if you're going to have that power, which I believe that you should always have the ability to defend yourself against at least the most common threats, which, in the United States today, especially in larger populations, if you want to defend yourself against the most common threats, which is gang violence, fist to fist, and knives, these are very common weapons, then a gun is the only thing that puts you in a superior position to ensure that you actually have we'll say like an overwhelming chance of winning that fight. And then other people have guns as well. And so you're just essentially leveling the playing field. And yeah, so what I mean when I say gun culture, absolutely, there is an inarguable responsibility on the gun owner to be well trained and to be proficient with their firearm. And that doesn't negate their right to own the firearm and to arm themselves. But I definitely would agree that, there's nothing wrong with saying you will have the training. However, it's just unfortunate that we have a government that, we have people in government who want to leverage wordplay, wordsmithing to ensure that people can't get access to firearms, that they tax training and they tax ammunition and they tax firearms to the extent that it's not feasible for people to have training when it's such a obvious, necessity and part of gun ownership. So it's almost like they're making the argument that you shouldn't own a gun because they're unsafe, when the clear solution is, well, then great. You provide all this education to children and young adults. Maybe self-defense should be a part of that, since, living in the real world is dangerous.
Okay. I just wanted to backtrack to that one just a little bit. We'll go back to the domestic violence restraining orders now. And you were talking about how the judges really, they have a lot of power, is what it seems like to me. And they're going to get a bad rap in a lot of this at times and looked upon negatively for issuing these, restraining orders. Sometimes they have to look out for themselves to an extent. Did you feel that there was a lot of self-preservation in that, or was it politically driven, or was it just a lack of really getting all the information and just taking the easy way out?
My understanding of the law at the time that I was doing all of this was that the judges, absolutely had to protect themselves. Again, because, humans are unpredictable. That is the reason that you need a gun in the first place, is that people do crazy things even when you don't expect. And so, these judges are presented with a problem where, one party says that, hey, they believe this person to be violent or to have done something to indicate they might commit violence. And so they need that restraining order. And so one of the judges put it to me this way, and he said, I can't take into consideration that a person may lose their gun rights. Even if I don't agree with that, I have to take into consideration whether the evidence is there to support the domestic violence restraining order, and also how likely it is that this thing were to happen if I were to deny it. And so really what the legislator has done has attached their gun control agenda to something that I wouldn't say didn't belong, but I mean, we know that restraining orders don't, while they may be a deterrent, they don't stop anyone from doing anything, right? They make it easier to arrest someone, but you can approach anyone at any time and no one's going to stop you. So they don't stop you from getting a gun, and they don't stop you from, they don't even make it, a restraining order doesn't even make it harder for a person to attack another person. It just makes the consequences of doing so criminal.
It wasn't always that the judges necessarily had a political agenda. I mean, that was probably a small part of it. But realistically, the government, our state government, California, is really going to be, they're going to tie in anywhere they can. And they looked at that as an opportunity to jump in there and have a little extra power.
What I saw a lot of, especially back then, there's an organization called Mad Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They are very powerful and like in the lobbying space. And it's the same in domestic violence. I mean, domestic violence is a terrible thing and it happens often. And when it does, it can be very bad. Men can overpower women, and sometimes women are, at fault as well. But the idea, the point being is that there are lobbyists out there who are fighting for these causes, and they're looking for Band-Aid solutions, and those Band-Aid solutions have unintended consequences, especially when someone who has an agenda gets their hands on that lobby, that we'll call it that mission, right? That these lobbyists are on, and they warp it to meet their own end goal.
So we'll look at it as unintended consequences, but realistically, a lot of those lobbyists are really, they have their intended consequences, and they're tying them together to get them in there. So that's where that's at. So on the next step after that, then, so we see why that's really important. You got this company going for that. We know you did a lot of apparel. You actually did a lot of training with firearms. One of the things in the past that I was very impressed with was when you did with your training courses. So tell us a little bit about your training courses you've done in the past.
Yeah. So I used to do a lot more in-person training. Like I've been, like I said, I've been in the gun culture for a long time. And so had different levels of training, and I've just always been the type of person that I learn something, I approach learning like I'm going to teach it. And that has always helped me to become more proficient and faster and obtain a deeper understanding of the thing. And so, I genuinely enjoy helping people along their journey. And part of that is the reality of having to defend yourself. So I did a lot of in-person training with, whether it was CCW training or just kind of beginner / intermediate training. I was a deputy and a soldier. I didn't do special forces or SWAT team or anything like that. So a lot of those guys, they're highly proficient, and definitely they get a different audience. But I felt that the average person would be intimidated by trying to train with these higher level guys. They were struggling with just the fundamentals of like not pointing their gun in the wrong direction, or how to rack a round in or out of the chamber, and how to clear malfunctions, and shooting on the move, So yeah, I would train people on those things, family, friends, and then later down the road, marketing to the general populace in Bakersfield.
So when we look at that, like I say, we live in Bakersfield, we live in Kern County. We know Kern County is very much a big supporter of the Second Amendment. We fortunately have a sheriff who has no problem issuing concealed carry permits, and it's pretty clear that he had better. Otherwise, we will get a new sheriff in this town. That's, but a lot of the states, or like the counties in this state, really are pretty good about that. One of the things that I've always felt, almost, on my own part, even, I don't do enough training. So how much training, how many times, how much fire, you get out there in live fire should somebody be doing when they're going to have a concealed carry. I mean, that's where I look at the responsibility part comes in. And, I'm just as negligent as other people not getting out and shooting enough and making sure I'm comfortable with my own firearms. But when you look at that as you're training folks, how many hours, how many times a week, how many times a month do you feel folks should be out putting some ammo down range or even dry firing?
Well, one, I would be a hypocrite if I said, what I actually believe it should be. But I can tell you that in law enforcement, we qualified every 3 months. And so we would be, tested to a point of proficiency quarterly. And, in this, while law enforcement officers have a certain obligation, right, we have delegated authority to them to go enforce the law on our behalf. And so they often find themselves in hairy situations more often than the average person, even the average CCW, right? But I think that by carrying, right, like there is a sect of the population that thinks that carrying a firearm just whenever, however, whatever they want should be their right. And while I do believe that it should be their right, I'm a proponent of training and being proficient and being a responsible citizen, because at the end of the day, if we are going to all agree to live in community together peacefully, then we are doing so for the mutual benefit of each other and each other's survival. And so if we're going to have, people out there that are going to carry and they're going to, practice their, right to self-defense and always ensure that they're ready for a threat, then I think that they should actually be ready to handle a threat and not be just willy-nilly carrying and not actually ready to handle something should it come, because you get those too. And I don't think that we have a lot of encounters. Like at least I don't hear about them. Not that that means anything, but we don't hear. I think that with the general culture, the general atmosphere of gun rights today, we would hear a lot more if this were the case. But, so I think that overall people are at least doing a decent job. But yeah, I think that you absolutely have a responsibility to train and stay trained because it is a perishable skill. And even though you can pick it up quick, what I learned from law enforcement was leaving law enforcement is this: when you train stress inoculation consistently, then it kind of stays with you. So you can experience high stress situations and it doesn't emotionally impact you, at least in the moment. But when you don't train, especially when you have trained in the past and you don't train, then the pendulum kind of swings almost the other way. And it can, fear can become anxiety, crippling anxiety. Right. And that's what we don't want, right? We don't want people out there carrying guns who are just so scared all the time that they screw up and do something stupid when they could have been practicing and training. And so I have absolutely no qualms with demanding that people train, as long as it doesn't prohibit them. It's not so prohibitive to them that they aren't able to carry because of costs and taxes and all.
Right, which we see happening in California. We see what our illustrious governor is putting forth, and our supermajority up there in Sacramento is doing everything they can to just basically tax us out of it, and really causing folks to. It's endangering people, in my opinion. To really make it to where they can't train enough or they can't defend themselves enough, or just making it so expensive that people just really can't do it as often as they need to, and making it hard, I think, to really get out there and shoot, when it's like anything else, in my opinion. If you're not doing it and you're not practicing, it's like I said, you use the perfect term there. I think it's a perishable skill, and you will start losing that. So I know, and I said, I'm just as guilty, just like anybody else. We all need to be doing it. So one of the things that comes up a lot, and when we say every citizen armed is a statement, and like I said, I think it's a little bit of a belief too. But in that, we do have the waiting periods in California and a lot of other places. Probably not real popular with a lot of folks. I actually support some type of background check and waiting period. I don't really have a problem with that as much. I don't necessarily agree with having to do the background check and waiting period every time you buy a firearm. If you already own a firearm and you already have your concealed carry permit, I think at that point you're already doing all the stuff you're supposed to be doing. You should be able to go buy your firearm if you want, in my opinion, like I said. But I'd be curious as an instructor and with your past experiences, how you feel about that, about the background checks and the waiting period.
Sure. So I don't think that, my time as an instructor or would necessarily give my opinion any more weight, but I think that just as a reasonable human being who believes in, the purpose of having, we have children, and the whole point of living in community with others is to promote safety and trade. And so in order for those things to happen, we have to have a bedrock of trust, and we have to feel comfortable around other people. I think that the waiting periods, let me put it this way. If the government, let's just say not the government, but let's say if society can take a life on behalf of justice, right? If we can take your freedom, your physical freedom, and imprison you and incarcerate you for criminal behavior, then asking whether or not we should have background checks, I think it's absolutely fine to have background checks. There is a situation where human beings have committed crimes that are so heinous that, well, in reality, they probably don't belong being alive in the first place.
Right. I agree with that.
So it's unfortunate that we don't have a justice system that promotes, either the death sentence or exile, because the idea is to take these disgusting, vile people and remove the threat from society. But so if we're not going to do that, then we definitely need to be checking to ensure that those people aren't out acquiring firearms because, well, we allowed them to exist in our society. Mm-hmm. There was a story recently here in Kern County where a father raped his 2-year-old daughter until she bled to death internally, and he got 11 years in prison.
11 years. Wow.
So that person is walking around on the street, or will be, and he deserved to die. He did not. We do not need human beings. I don't care what your religious beliefs are. I don't care what your opinion of the situation is, because unless you're the one who's going to be his neighbor, unless you're, and you've got kids, then in my opinion, you don't really have, you're not qualified.
No, at that point, your opinion really doesn't matter, because the folks that are making those decisions are more than likely in a gated community. The ones that are really making the decisions actually have their own security staff with them on a regular basis. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. I have no problem taking those folks. And the sad part is he got 11 years. Let's be real. He'll probably be out in 6. He's not going to serve the full 11. And he's going to get put in special assignment in prison. He's going to get put over protective custody. He's not going to be in that much danger. Realistically, I'd say if you're going to put him in general population and let them take care of it. And they would. And
these people are, they're going to, it's not just one person. This happens every day.
Yes.
This happens in your county, your city. It happens all the time. And you just don't know it because you're not in law enforcement, and your government keeps this information from you and doesn't allow you to know all of the heinous things that people are doing in your own community. And so it is, part of this every citizen armed idea is that we have allowed our government to become so powerful that they can keep secrets that they are not entitled to keep from us. Their entire existence is founded upon the provision of protecting us physically and also to ensure fair trade. And what they have done is they have usurped even more authority beyond what we've given them, and they're not reporting on crimes that are happening. They have people walking around who are uneducated about the level of threat that's actually existing in their community. And then these people are becoming victims. And then whenever they become victims, they're not being represented in the justice system. In fact, instead, we are offering plea deals and then letting people out of prison early. So our government is fallen short. The people that run the government created a system by offering these plea deals. They created the more crime, and then they created this. So rather than just doing it right up front and prosecuting people for the crimes they commit and solving the problem as it happens, we have allowed them to essentially abdicate their duties that we have delegated to them. And because of that, now we need to have access to firearms, and we also need to have access to training. And they're taking all of that away from us, or at least they're doing their absolute best to do that. So while they're promoting rehabilitation, and they, that's what they say they're promoting, which I'm a proponent of for sure. But while they're promoting rehabilitation and letting these people out back into society, they're also taking our ability to defend our families. And so I think it's important for us to remember that the people making those decisions are humans too. And they live in the same communities as we do. And I think it's important to remember that they are just as human as the next person.
One of the things that I've noticed in the past and looked at, and it'll scare the heck out of you when you really look at it, like that guy there, that sleazeball. Let's go take a look at the child molester website. You could track them in your neighborhood. That registry, which is everywhere. Luckily, I think it was Adam Walsh that really pushed that. If I remember right, I could be completely wrong, but it seems like he's the one that really got that pushed through. So you look at that child molester registration, you will be amazed how many of them are all around you. But one of the other comments you made in there about the plea deals, and you were in the court system, so you saw the plea deals a lot. One of the things that always frustrated me is when we got rid of 3 strikes. To me, that was actually a huge mistake. And that goes right to that plea deal aspect. And then you'll always hear the folks use, well, there was the guy down in San Diego that got his 3rd strike because he stole some pizza for some kids. And that wasn't necessarily a violent crime. Well, for one thing, you weren't those 9 and 10-year-old girls or whatever it was he stole the pizza from. You tell me it wasn't violent for them, that some convicted felon came up and threatened them and stole their food, and they were scared. To me, that makes it violent. But in that, when a person finally got to where they had 3 strikes, I'd be curious how many plea deals they had to get to that point. If you get to where you're actually being convicted of a violent felony, how many plea deals do you think would be in the works before that? Probably more than 5 or 10 on a lot of those folks. That's not that they committed 3 crimes. They probably committed 30 or 40 or 50. Is that what you would see when you were in the courts?
So definitely, in courts and the jail, right? Because we got to see their criminal history as they came through, and then again in the courts they would bring that up. It's behavior is a pattern, right? So one of the things I am an expert in human psychology. I've written and published numerous books. My work is used in clinical psychology and therapy. And one of the things that we know is that, if you behave a certain way once, people make mistakes. But if you do it twice, right, we can now start seeing a pattern. And behavioral patterns are built on how people view the world. And so the 3 strikes rule, it was absolutely a positive, because it didn't just take someone out the first time, right? If you go back in history, then they would have just exiled them, killed them, prosecuted them immediately. And so this gave people who were engaged in criminal activity an opportunity to feel the consequences of their actions without it permanently impacting their life. And this goes back to the death penalty and exile. The 3 strikes rule is just another opportunity. It's almost like a rehabilitative program, because once you get spanked once, you should have learned. But if you got spanked twice and you didn't learn, and then you did it again, well, obviously there's something wrong with our child rearing system. There's something wrong with our economic system. And there's something wrong with our justice system, because it's not stopping the threat. And it happens so persistently that we can look at these patterns and say, why are we allowing our government? Why are we allowing the people that we have elected and delegated this authority to protect us and keep us safe? Why are we allowing them to continue down this path? Plea deals are a miscarriage of justice in and of themselves. They don't belong in the justice system. And this is why. Because when someone commits a crime, our society is held together by something that I call the web of trust. Every human being that agrees to live in community with other human beings and engage in trade and engage in mutual benefit for one another, they do so on the basis of the most basic mutual trust that the person that they are living in community with will not steal from them or take from them or leave them less than whole. And this is why our justice system is built the way that it is. When a criminal commits a crime, they not only have to pay restitution to the victim and make them whole, but they also have to pay restitution to restore the public faith in them. Those 2 elements have to exist in a justice system in order to maintain peace in a society. Okay, so when we create a system where criminals are not being prosecuted and punished, and removing the threat from society, and we're allowing that threat to exist in society, we are damaging that web of trust. We are creating the cycle of crime that is forcing the DA and the court system to have to offer plea deals in the first place. So the solution is on the front end. It's from not setting the correct expectations. And now we've allowed this system to corrupt itself. And that has left us more unsafe and in even greater need of owning guns and being proficient in defending ourselves.
Very good. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And when I look at it, and we talk about guns, we talk about every citizen armed, we talk about all these different things. There's a lot of other responsibility that goes along with that. That's your last course, is using your firearm. You need to be taking responsibility in other ways too, as for your own self, to get out there and be able to defend your family, defend your neighbors, defend your community if you feel you need to do that. And I think that could be, with our law enforcement, I've actually felt pretty strongly, and I'd love to talk to some of them in the future about it that are working now and what they're seeing and how they feel about it. Some of the folks that are really having to put up with all of this right now. We're seeing so much going on. I just feel there's a lot of folks that really can't take care of themselves and don't know what's going on. How many of these young people do we talk to now? You'll ask them about what's going on in the news, and they say, well, I really don't like to look at that. I don't like to see what's going on. It just depresses me to see it. That is probably, that is, in my opinion, one of the worst things that could be happening, because now they've lost all interest. And what that's going to do is they're going to give up more power. They're going to give up all of their responsibility. They're going to give up any chance they can of defending themselves, because they're not going to know what's coming. We saw that in my opinion, with COVID. Just the other day, listening to Fauci talk when he was doing his speech, and when they had him in front of Congress, they played one of his speeches, and he talked about that, about how if you make it so difficult and to where people just really don't pay attention, and then they lose all their ideologic bullshit. That was his terminology. That's really sad, and that's kind of what we see happening, is what I'm afraid right now. So I really do feel that people need to get out there and learn other ways to take care of themselves and defend themselves. But of course, the firearms is going to be an easier path, but I think it is very dangerous. You got to be responsible. You got to really take care of what you have in your house and be ready. There's a lot of other measures, alarm systems, screen doors, take your pick. But at the same time, you want to make sure you're ready. You don't want to be that person. You hear everybody say it, I don't want to, I'd rather have my firearm and not need it, and instead of need it and not have it. To me, that's always been kind of an important thing. And the folks that disagree, when they see that I do carry a firearm, and I have some very good friends that really, it makes them uncomfortable. And I've actually had some folks that were very uncomfortable until we got into a very hairy situation. And one of them actually asked me as we were getting out of the truck, "Do you have your firearm with you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "Okay." And I always told him, I said, "Don't ever infringe on my rights to protect you." And that's the way I've always felt about it. So I think I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Now, when we get into this a little more, I know that we're trying to set up ways for people to get out there and really understand their firearms, how to use their firearms. There's a county in Florida that actually I was watching the sheriff the other day doing an interview, and that particular county, they actually do firearm safety courses every other weekend, I believe it is. And they, really want folks to come out and learn how to use their guns and have guns and own guns. They would prefer it. He actually made it a comment that probably wasn't very popular in a lot of blue states, but he said, "I would rather you guys have guns and you shoot these guys that are breaking into your houses and kill them. We don't want them coming to court. Save the taxpayers money. Take it out, and we will teach you how to use your guns." I would love to see something like that in California. That's pretty aggressive, but I'm okay with that. Realistically, I have no problem with that. But how would we go about getting in this state ever anything like that? That would be almost impossible.
Well, so there's a little bit of irony in the gun law movement, because when they go after, when they say they're going to implement some new law, people rush to the gun stores, and then even more guns are put out into the market
Every time.
And this is the challenge, right? And unfortunately, we have to go deep with these topics because it's important that we understand why we're doing what we're doing. And it's human beings are looking for the best path forward. We're all going to die someday, but we don't want it to be today. Exactly. And so with that, right, we have established these communities, and we take it back to the very beginning. Our government, we didn't need a government up until a certain population, right? We came together and we were able to protect each other and engage trade until conflict arose. And then we had to have a third party to help with negotiating, right? Mediating, so that we didn't kill each other. That's the whole purpose of having a third party government. Rather than one person who's left less than whole attacking and taking back what was theirs, we now have an intermediary who can help us to do that peacefully. And I think that, we have lost that over time, because as we have created safer communities, new generations are born into those safe communities, and they don't understand the threat. We make decisions, we imagine our reality based on what I call our realm of possibilities. And if you have not experienced something, if you've not, even, it doesn't matter if you've seen it on TV, if you haven't experienced the pain, the fear in your own body and in your own mind of a threat, then there's no way for your brain to grasp or to comprehend what kind of threat is out there. And this speaks right to the story you told about your friend. As soon as she felt unsafe, she went right, even though she didn't believe you should have a gun, she wanted to know that you had a gun. And that's because, or at least that just goes to show, right? That's one anecdotal situation, but we know that there are thousands of those every single day in this city alone, probably in just one half of the city. people are, it is dangerous to live in community with other people, especially when the economic system is leaving people behind and they're not agreeing to live in community. They're just, crime is on the rise, and the truth is we just can't house all of them. The system itself is in a cycle of corruption, and it's unfortunately it's on a path to, it's probably on a path towards destruction, self-destruction. And so I think that that's an amazing story to hear, that the sheriff, right, who is an elected official, is taking it upon himself to ensure that, hey, if the justice system won't do it, if we can't protect our citizens beyond the arrest, then, well, maybe we'll just get them on the front end then, right? We'll teach our citizens how to shoot. We'll promote these situations. And our sheriff, while he's a great politician, especially a promoter of the Second Amendment, is not doing anyone any favors by not allowing people to understand the threats that are going on in the society. They say they can make whatever excuses they want. They can say, well, they don't need to know about all this stuff because then they're just going to live in fear. But the reality is that they do already live in fear. And fortunately, it's subconscious, and they live in anxiety. They don't exactly know, and they're able to look away from it. But, that is what allows, by sweeping things under the rug, that is what allows this situation in the first place, right? Like, if we're not going to tell the populace the threat that they are under, and I get that, we learned about mob mentality and how fear can can enter into a society and corrupt. But at the end of the day, that if you are not actually able to protect the people, then they need to know, because it's ultimately the government is a third party delegate for us and works on our behalf. And if they're hiding it from us, then, it's going to land whoever, well, I feel bad for whoever is in power when it does fall, because they're going to take the heat.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I see a lot of, we all know crime is rising, yet you will watch the news and they will tell you crime rates are lower now than they were X date, whatever it was. They're dropping, they're this or that. I would challenge folks in that to really look at it and understand crime rate is not going down. The crimes are just not being reported, because realistically, the law enforcement, if they're going to go out there and arrest people, they're going to arrest them, they go to the jail, and they're out 4 hours later. So at what point are you going to have folks really go through and say, your sheriffs and your BPD here in town, they're going to, why am I going to waste my time arresting this guy? I'm going to give him a talking to, send him on his way, or there's nothing I could do about that right now. So it does fall back on us to really take and protect ourselves. I really feel that. But we know the crime is up. We feel it. We see it. I do think there's a lot of folks that better start paying a little more attention. Get your heads out of your phones. We're all watching these reels and TikTok and this and that. Situational awareness. Pay attention to what's going on around you, wherever you're at. And I have daughters. You have sisters. We all know, your wife. We all know that they could be prey. They're in rough areas at times. We've always taught them to be situationally aware. We know it doesn't always happen, but I look at these young folks walking around, and it scares me when I see them. Get your head out of your phone. Know what's going on around you. That if these folks really aren't going to jail like they should be, then they're going to be out in the public doing whatever they want to do. We see them on the street. We see them walking around. We know the homeless problem is completely out of control. We know the drug problem is completely out of control. We know we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people coming over the border. We don't know who they are. If you look back in history and you can see what Cuba did back when they emptied their prisons and sent them to us. Is that what's happening in some of these other countries? So who's coming over? We really don't know. So we really need to be able to take care of yourself. We know there was 30-something thousand Chinese folks come over the border in the last year, in the last, I think, 7-8 months. That seems a little odd to me. Why is that when the year before it was maybe 400? Something has changed. we all better start taking a little more responsibility about ourselves and be ready to protect what you have, protect your people. And I think this really does lead right into that. So
there are over 30,000 registered gang members in Los Angeles County alone. That's more than the entire population of the National Guard in California. So, it's not just the foreign threats. Like, these things are happening. Whatever the Chinese, could come over and do, sure, they're gathering intelligence, and sure, that could lead to a more large-scale war. But on a day-to-day basis, like, there are cartel members that are, stealing children, setting them off to, traffic them out, right? And, and those are the things that's not even, that's like one of the worst things that could possibly happen to a family. And it happens all the time, but it's so much more than that. There's so much more going on that, if you think you live in a safe society, well, it may seem relatively safe, and that's because maybe you're on the right side of town. Maybe you were born into a better situation, but that's not the case for the majority. And so, yes, things have changed. This is what has changed. Caesar said, bread and games, right? If you want to rule, all you need is bread and games, which is food and entertainment. And that is what we have allowed to enter into our societies to distract us. You talked about Facebook Reels. I own 4 different marketing agencies, and I study all of these things. And, where people can't even watch a video for like 2 to 3 seconds, max 15 seconds before their attention, they're already bored. They're already moving on to the next thing, because we live in a society where you don't know the threats. So you feel like you're at peace. And so, unfortunately, the mind works this way. If you're too safe, then you start seeking too much pleasure. And whenever you seek too much pleasure, you distract yourself, you lose purpose. And that's what we see today, is a loss of purpose, a loss of meaning, increased crime. And this is why they say strong men, how does the saying go? Strong men create so strong men create good times create weak men create hard times, and hard times create strong men. That is the cycle, and that is why, because we are breeding new generations into a society that they don't understand. They don't know how it got there. And we don't have what are called the rites of passage to teach them, to force them to understand the realities of life and remove all of the social lipstick that we have painted over what life is really about. And until we do that, right, until we figure out that we have to teach our children what it means to be alive, and what it means, the threats that are actually there, the things that they're actually supposed to be doing, how to defend themselves, why they should defend themselves, and what it means to live amongst all these other human beings. Until we do that as a standard, then we will continuously go through this cycle of building, crashing, and rebuilding. And it's unfortunate, and I hope that we can come out of it. But I think that, our economic system and the way that it pays off politicians and benefits big corporate, behemoths it's so far gone that it's going to take the collapse. It's going to feel the pain to understand why we had such good times. And then maybe the next time around, we'll actually build those systems into our society so that our children always reach adulthood and self-sufficiency with a clear understanding of what it is they were supposed to be doing in the first place.
Yeah, and I know we've got pretty dark and deep on a few things here today, and it is what it is. We just want to make sure folks understand what's out there. One of the things that I always want to bring onto one of these podcasts when we're doing it is a little story. And I read this one, and I think it's important. I was looking at it, and it's about a gun owner who was able to protect herself. And this is about, her name is Christine, and I'm going to butcher this last name more than likely. It's Genia or something like that, up in Idaho. 85-year-old woman up in Idaho. She is a mother with a disabled son who's living with her. In the middle of the night, this Derek Condon decides to break into her house. hits her in the head while she's sleeping. She comes to, doesn't realize what's going on, but then he's got the gun and a flashlight in her face, drags her into her front room, handcuffs her to her wooden chair, and starts demanding all of her valuables. And she says, I don't really have any, but you get what I can, take what you want. And he doesn't know that her son is in the house yet, and his disabled son. And like I said, this woman is 85 years old. Now, this is one tough woman, because at this point, this scumbag Derek decides to go start searching the house, and she sees her opening. Now, granted, she's been hit in the head. She's already a little injured, handcuffed to this chair, grabs the chair, drags it into her bedroom, gets her gun, which was under her pillow. It was a .357 Magnum, drags the chair back out into the living room, sits back down, and she's there waiting. And she's, at this point, in my opinion, she has every right just to shoot him as soon as she sees him. As soon as he walks back in, take him out. But, she's a nice woman, I guess, and she figures she wants to see what he's going to do. Well, when he comes back in, instead of leaving, he starts threatening her again. And at that point, she realized she had no choice. So she shot him twice. He got him in the chest. Well, he, of course, opened fire on her also. He shoots this 85-year-old woman 4 times, and she's tore up pretty good. Got her in the arm, got her in the stomach, I think got her in the chest at one point. Now, luckily, this Derek, he crawls into the kitchen and dies. That's the best thing that could happen for him. This 85-year-old woman passes out, lays down, passes out. 12 hours later, they find her, and they manage to get her, and she lives, which is amazing to me, because here she is. She's handcuffed to a chair. She's been hit while she was sleeping, blood all over her pillow, has her disabled son in the house, but she still manages to defend her house, her family, and herself, and take a bad guy off the streets. That woman should be applauded. And she was in her neighborhood, and she is in her community. So when you look at that, this is why you want to make sure that you have the ability to take care of yourself and take care of your people. And I think at that point, this was a great person to do that. And I don't know that we have a lot of tough women, 85-year-old women like this are going to be doing much of this in the near future, as we continue to raise folks that are a little bit softer than they need to be, in my opinion. So when we look at that, think about this. Think about Christine and what she did and how she was able to save these folks and save the taxpayers some money at the same time. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up today. Now, in that, we're going to be coming back with a couple more. We'll do some lighthearted ones. We'll do some serious ones. But we'll put some folks into the chat, I think, with some links to find your local instructor. Find your folks out there that can train you. Go down and get the training, get your permits, do it the proper way. Don't go buy guns illegal necessarily. That's all you do is get yourself in trouble. You want to make sure and train yourself and get good training on this. Now, like any good company, we've got some apparel out there. We'll put a link for that in our chats also. Get some of our hats, our shirts, and so forth. It's going to cost a bunch to get this, to keep this podcast going. So we're gonna find some ways to do that. We're picking up a couple sponsors, but at the same time, we'd like to talk to some of the other folks out there, whether it be law enforcement that are willing to come on. You might have to be retired if you're able to come on, but we have some folks that are being elected. When you look at different sheriffs and so forth, that we'd like to get them on and get their opinions and understand their processes. So as we move forward, think about that and think about who you would like us to talk to. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, it's a great learning spot for me also, and for Charles. I think it would be great when we look at that. And him and I don't agree on everything, and I think that's perfect. You don't have to. I don't want to talk to people that I agree with all the time. That's boring. I want to talk to everybody, and I want to learn as much as I can. And there's a lot out there I don't know. So how would you like to wrap up what you're doing?
Yeah, I think with that, we'll set up a Patreon, and that Patreon will have a couple different membership levels. So if you guys want to support the cause, the Every Citizen Armed cause, whether it's through, buying some of our clothing and supporting the Second Amendment, wearing it proudly on your chest, or signing up for the Patreon, or both, that is the absolute best way to support this mission. And, I think we have some important things to say. And I think a lot of people out there have important things to say. And the best thing we can do is to give them a voice, hear their reason, and ultimately spread good culture, and really bring that back. And there was a lot of things about our history and our past that were painful, but now with this new enlightened, era where we get so much more knowledge, it's important to maybe pair that with the proper culture and understanding, and you breed peace through strength. So
Absolutely. So thank you guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed what we've had to say today, and we will move on to the next.
see you then.
Have a great day.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Best of all, a 5-star review is much appreciated.